Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
The Shadow over Street Agnes. Chapter 1, The Stranger at the Vicarage. The evening rain came down in a slow, relentless drizzle that drummed against the stained glass of St. Agnes. Inside the vicarage, Father Brown sat quietly beside the fire, a small lamp glowing at his elbow, a cup of cocoa cooling on the table. He was reading a slim book of sermons when he heard the first knock, soft, uncertain, almost apologetic. He looked up, listening. Few visitors came at that hour, especially in such weather. The second knock was louder, edged with urgency. Father Brown rose, adjusted his spectacles, and shuffled to the door. When he opened it, a figure stood on the threshold, a man of middle age, soaked to the bone, his hat pulled low, his coat splattered with mud. "Good evening," Father Brown said gently, as though welcoming an old friend. "You'd better come in before you catch your death." The man hesitated. "Are you Father Brown?" "I am," the priest replied, stepping aside. "And you are?" The stranger entered without answering. He stood near the fire, trembling, steam rising from his wet clothes. His eyes darted around the room, toward the crucifix on the wall, the rows of well-worn books, the photographs of parish picnics. Something in those simple homely details seemed to calm him, if only a little. "I don't have much time," the man said finally. "They'll come for me before midnight." Father Brown raised an eyebrow but spoke softly. "Who will come for you?" The stranger reached into his coat and drew out a small envelope sealed with deep red wax. The seal bore a cross and a crown. "Give this to no one but yourself," he said. "Not the police. Not anyone. You'll understand soon." The priest took it carefully. "You're troubled, my son. Perhaps you should sit, dry yourself. We can talk." But the man shook his head sharply. "No. Talking won't change what's coming." His voice faltered. "You'll see the truth tomorrow. The sins of the past return tonight." Before Father Brown could reply, the man turned, opened the door, and vanished into the downpour. The priest stood for a long time, the envelope heavy in his hand, listening to the dying echoes of footsteps swallowed by the storm. He placed the letter on the mantel and stared at it. There was something about that seal, a faint memory, perhaps from years ago. A parish donor? A military insignia? He couldn't quite place it. After a moment's hesitation, he broke the wax and unfolded the note inside. The handwriting was precise and careful. "When the hour strikes 11, the guilty will pay their debt. Do not seek me. Pray instead for the soul of Lord Pembroke." Father Brown's brow furrowed. Lord Pembroke was the wealthiest man in the parish, a man of influence, temper, and pride, whose estate overlooked half of the countryside. Only that morning, he had sent word asking the priest to bless his new library, though he was not known for piety. The clock ticked quietly on the mantel. 10:30. Father Brown slipped on his coat and hat, tucked the letter into his pocket, and stepped out into the storm. The road to Pembroke Manor was a long, winding path through the woods, and his lantern barely pierced the mist. Each step sank into mud, and the air smelled of rain and old leaves. A distant peal of thunder rolled like warning drums across the valley. When he reached the gates, the lodge lights were out. The great house loomed beyond, its windows glowing faintly. He hurried through the iron gates, noting something peculiar, a second set of footprints beside his own. They were large, deep, and unevenly spaced, as though the man who made them was limping or carrying a burden. Inside the manor, the servants were awake and anxious. The butler, a gray-haired man named Harris, recognized Father Brown instantly. "Thank heaven you're here, sir," he said in a low voice. "Something's wrong with his lordship. He's locked himself in his study since supper, wouldn't let anyone in." "Has he been ill?" "Not that I know, sir." "But," the butler's voice dropped further. "We heard a noise. Like a gunshot." Father Brown's eyes darkened. "Take me to him." They climbed the grand staircase. At the top, the corridor smelled faintly of gunpowder. The study door was locked from the inside. Harris fetched a key from the kitchen, but Father Brown noticed something first, a smudge of mud near the threshold, a faint trail leading toward the door and stopping abruptly. He bent down and examined it in silence. When the door swung open, a gust of cold air met them. Lord Pembroke sat slumped in his armchair, a revolver by his right hand. A crimson stain spread across his chest. The lamp on the desk flickered, illuminating papers scattered across the floor. "It looks like," Harris faltered. "A suicide." Father Brown's calm eyes moved from the pistol to the wound, then to the window behind the chair, partly open, rain dripping from the sill. "Perhaps," he murmured. "But sometimes appearances lie." He stepped closer, studying the scene. The gun lay awkwardly, pointing the wrong direction for a right-handed man. The wound was slightly off-center, angled from below. And there, on the carpet near the desk, was a faint print of wet leather. He turned to the butler. "Did anyone leave the house tonight?" "No one, sir." "Not since dinner." Father Brown looked again at the body. The man's face, though rigid in death, bore an expression of surprise, not despair. On the mantel above him hung a small wooden crucifix, a gift from the church. It was missing the rosary that usually hung from it. "The rosary," Father Brown whispered. Harris blinked. "What about it, sir?" "It was taken," the priest said softly. "And I believe the thief returned it in guilt, or in warning." The inspector arrived an hour later, a stout man named Craven who prided himself on swift conclusions. He listened to Father Brown's quiet observations with polite disinterest. "Open and shut case," Craven said briskly. "Lord Pembroke shot himself. End of story." "Indeed?" Father Brown replied mildly. "Then I suppose you can explain why the bullet entered from an angle inconsistent with his hand." The inspector frowned. "You think it was murder?" "I think," Father Brown said gently, "it was judgment." Craven snorted. "Judgment? You and your church talk." He waved toward the body. "Look at him. What else could it be?" Father Brown didn't answer. Instead, he looked again at the open window, at the mud on the carpet, at the faint scent of tobacco in the air that didn't belong to Lord Pembroke's brand. Then he pulled the rain-soaked letter from his pocket and handed it to the inspector. Craven read it and went pale. "Good Lord. You mean someone warned you this would happen?" "Yes," Father Brown said softly. "A stranger came to my door tonight, spoke of sins returning. I think this is only the beginning." Outside, thunder rolled again over the moors. Somewhere beyond the walls of Pembroke Manor, another figure moved in the darkness, watching, waiting. Father Brown crossed himself and looked at the lifeless man once more. "The storm has only just begun," he murmured. And as the lightning flashed through the window, he saw it clearly for the first time, the shape of the missing rosary reflected faintly in the blood upon the carpet. Chapter 2, The Secret of the Silver Cross. Morning light crept through the tall windows of St. Agnes, painting streaks of pale gold across the pews. Father Brown knelt near the altar, whispering his morning prayer. Yet even in that sacred calm, the echo of the previous night haunted him, the soaked stranger, the cryptic letter, and Lord Pembroke's lifeless body slumped in his study. When the service ended, the church felt unusually empty. Only Mrs. Hargreaves, the parish clerk, remained behind to polish the candlesticks. She noticed Father Brown's faraway gaze. "You look troubled, Father," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "I often am when sin wears a polite face." Mrs. Hargreaves frowned. "You mean the Lord's death?" He nodded. "There's more beneath it than despair. Something long buried has come to the surface." Before she could ask more, the door opened, and a maid in black hurried down the aisle, clutching her apron. "Father Brown. Mrs. Pembroke asks for you at once. She's taken ill." Within the hour, Father Brown was at Pembroke Manor once more. The grand house looked gloomier in daylight, its curtains drawn and servants whispering in corners. He was led to the drawing room where Mrs. Pembroke sat pale and trembling beside the fire. Her morning dress was immaculate, but her eyes betrayed sleeplessness. She rose slowly when he entered. "Father, thank you for coming. I'm ashamed to trouble you so soon after all this." "You need not apologize, my dear," Father Brown said softly. "Grief does not keep proper hours." She offered a faint smile, then gestured toward the mantel. "Do you see that cross, Father?" He turned. A silver crucifix gleamed in the dim light, elegant, ornate, and far finer than the wooden one missing from the study. "That was not always silver," she said quietly. "It was once the church's cross. My husband replaced it years ago. He said the wood was cracked, unfit for display. But that was a lie. He had it melted down and recast." Father Brown's brow furrowed. "Recast?" "Yes. From silver brought home after the war." Her voice trembled. "He said it came from an old French chapel, abandoned, looted, forgotten. I believed him then. But lately, he'd begun to fear it was cursed." The priest's gaze lingered on the cross. "The sins of the past return," he murmured. Mrs. Pembroke looked up sharply. "You've heard that phrase before? A man said it to me last night, before your husband's death. He left me a letter sealed with a cross and crown." Her hand went to her mouth. "That seal, my husband had it engraved on his wartime chest. It contained his medals, his letters, and something else he never spoke of." "What was it?" She hesitated. "I don't know. He kept the chest locked in the crypt beneath the church after the restoration. Only he and one other man had the key, a soldier named Gervais." Father Brown's eyes softened. "Perhaps the same man who came to my door." Mrs. Pembroke closed her eyes. "He used to send letters, begging for forgiveness. My husband never answered. He said God would understand, even if men could not." "God always understands," Father Brown said quietly, "but men have a habit of collecting their own debts." As he prepared to leave, his eyes caught a glint at the edge of the carpet, a rosary bead, blackened and cracked. He knelt and picked it up. "This belonged to the church," he murmured. Mrs. Pembroke turned pale. "It was my husband's now. He said it brought him peace at night." "Peace," Father Brown said softly, "rarely comes from stolen things." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the village washed clean. Father Brown walked slowly back toward St. Agnes, the rosary bead in his hand. He felt the weight of the silver cross in his mind, the pride that had turned charity into vanity, faith into fear. When he entered the church, Mrs. Hargreaves was lighting the altar candles. "You've been to the manor again," she said. "Yes," he replied. "And I think the cross above the altar is not the one that should be there." She frowned. How do you mean, Father? He stepped to the front, lifting his gaze to the shining crucifix that caught the morning sun. The Lord's cross was replaced years ago, he explained. The silver one I saw today was once here. It was meant to sanctify a stolen thing by hiding it in plain sight. Mrs. Hargreaves crossed herself. That's blasphemy. It's also clever, Father Brown murmured. A thief with a conscience makes the most ingenious sinner. That afternoon, Inspector Craven arrived at the vicarage, his boots muddy, his manner brisk. Brown, he said, we've traced that stranger who visited you. The innkeeper saw him last night, left without paying his bill. Name of Gervais, according to the register. Former sergeant. Served under Lord Pembroke in France. Alive? Craven nodded. He was, until dawn. A farmer found his coat in the woods by the river, torn and blood-stained. No body yet. Father Brown sighed. Another debt paid, then. The inspector looked at him sharply. You think Pembroke killed him? I think, the priest said, that war never ends simply because the guns fall silent. Craven grunted. Always the philosopher. He leaned closer. We found something else. The pistol from Pembroke's study, cleaned and reloaded. It's missing now. Father Brown's gaze drifted toward the church spire through the window. Then we must expect a third death soon. Chapter 3, The Bells of Midnight. The moon hung low over the village of St. Agnes, its pale glow breaking through streaks of drifting fog. The church stood silent against the dark sky, a solitary figure among sleeping cottages. Inside the vicarage, Father Brown sat at his desk, the small silver key resting before him on a folded piece of paper. He had tried reading scripture to still his thoughts, but his mind kept circling back to the crypt beneath the church, and to the men whose secrets seemed buried there. The letter's warning echoed in his head, return the cross before the last survivor is taken. Outside, the night stretched quiet and uneasy. Then, without warning, the church bell began to toll. 1. 2. 3. The sound rolled through the air like a slow heartbeat. Father Brown froze. The ropes of the bell tower were locked each evening, and only he kept the key. He rose, took his lantern, and stepped into the cold. Mist swirled around his feet as he crossed the graveyard, the bell's deep tone still vibrating through the stones. The heavy oak door creaked as he entered the church. The nave was dim, lit only by the moon filtering through colored glass. Dust motes floated like faint spirits in the beam of his lantern. He climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the belfry. The sound had stopped now, but a faint metallic scent hung in the air, iron and salt. When he reached the top, his lantern light caught the figure of a man hanging from the great beam, a noose cutting into his neck. His boots swayed gently above the wooden floor. Father Brown's breath left him in a whisper. Oh, merciful heaven! The man's head was bowed, his face shadowed. In his right hand, clenched tight, gleamed the missing silver cross. It was smeared with blood, the chain tangled around his wrist. A small scrap of paper was pinned to his coat, written in jagged Latin letters, Confessio non est finus. Confession is not the end. The priest crossed himself, then carefully lowered the body with quiet reverence. Beneath the coat, he found the insignia of a soldier, Sergeant Gervais. The same stranger who had come to his door. He looked at the cross again. Blood crusted at its base, but the rest shone as though polished by trembling hands. The missing rosary bead was still attached to it. He remembered Mrs. Pembroke's words, he said it was cursed. Father Brown turned sharply as a door slammed below. Someone else was in the church. He descended the steps swiftly but silently, the lantern swinging at his side. Down in the nave, a shadow moved between the pews, broad-shouldered, quick. The priest called out softly, "You need not hide, my son. There's no sin so dark that light cannot reach it." The shadow froze. Then a voice, rough, fearful, answered, "Stay back, Father. You don't understand." Father Brown stopped a few steps away. "Perhaps not. But I do understand fear. It makes good men foolish." The man stepped forward into the lantern glow. It was Samuel, the young servant from Pembroke Manor. His face was pale, eyes red with tears. "I didn't kill him," he said hoarsely. "I swear I didn't." "Then why are you here?" I came to pray. I heard the bells. I thought maybe the Lord was calling." His gaze dropped to the floor. "I saw the man who came last night. He was talking with Lady Pembroke near the orchard. She gave him something, looked like silver." Father Brown's eyes softened. "The cross?" Samuel nodded. "She said it would bring him peace. But he looked frightened. Like he'd rather face death than take it." The priest's mind raced. So the cross changed hands twice in one night. Once in guilt, once in deception. Samuel clutched his hands. "You must tell the police, Father." "I can't." "Peace," Father Brown said quietly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Peace comes only when truth is spoken in full." He turned toward the altar, gazing at the crucifix. "And there are more truths waiting below." By dawn, Inspector Craven was at the church again, his usual bluster replaced by irritation. "Another corpse," he muttered. "Do you make a habit of collecting them, Brown?" Father Brown ignored the remark. He was the man from last night. Sergeant Gervais. He didn't hang himself. Craven raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "Quite," said the priest. The knot was too perfect for his own hand, and his boots bare scuff marks from being dragged. Besides, he lifted the paper with the Latin phrase. He wrote beautifully, but this was carved with haste. Craven frowned at the words. "What does it mean?" "Confession is not the end," Father Brown translated softly. "It means someone demanded repentance, and when it was refused, offered punishment instead." Craven snorted. "So we're looking for a killer who thinks he's God." Father Brown sighed. "No, Inspector. We're looking for a sinner who thinks God needs his help." Later that morning, after the body had been removed, Father Brown examined the belfry again. Beneath one of the wooden boards, he found a small keyhole, old, almost hidden by dust. He inserted the silver key marked SAC. The lock clicked softly. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small iron box. Inside lay 4 photographs, soldiers in uniform, smiling awkwardly at a war camp table. One was Lord Pembroke. One was Gervais. The other 2 were strangers, one with a scar across his cheek, the other wearing an officer's cap marked R. He also found a faded page from a chaplain's field book. The line at the bottom was underlined twice. "For men swore before God to return the silver to his house. Only one kept his word." Father Brown replaced the paper, his hands trembling slightly. "So it began with theft," he whispered, "and ends with vengeance." Outside, the morning sun struggled through the mist, casting long shadows across the gravestones. Somewhere beyond the hills, he knew, the remaining men of that oath still lived, or were being hunted. He looked once more at the blood-stained cross. Its shine mocked him with its beauty. "Whoever kills for confession," he said softly, "forgets that mercy is the only proof of faith." The bell rope swayed gently beside him, moved by no wind at all. And as the echoes of its midnight toll faded from his memory, Father Brown knew one thing with dreadful certainty: the sins of Saint Agnes had not yet finished ringing. Chapter 4: The Chest Beneath the Crypt. The church stood quiet under a grey dawn, its bell tower silhouetted against a sky streaked with pale mist. Father Brown had not slept. He had sat through the night in his small study, the silver key resting beside a candle, the photographs spread out like silent witnesses. The faces of those soldiers, Pembroke, Gervase, and the two unknown men, seemed to stare back at him through time, bound by a promise that had curdled into sin. When the first light broke, he made up his mind. The key belonged to St. Agnes's crypt. If the truth lay anywhere, it was beneath the altar, buried with the dead and the guilty alike. Mrs. Hargreaves met him at the church door with a start. "Father, you're here so early. After last night's horrors, I thought you'd rest." "I will," he said gently, "when peace returns to this house of God." He fetched a lantern and led her toward the steps behind the altar, where a narrow door descended into the crypt. The smell of damp stone and old incense filled the air. The lantern flame flickered as they moved downward, each footstep echoing like a whisper. At the base of the stairs, they reached the iron gate. The lock was ancient, ornate and rusted, but the silver key fit perfectly. With a soft click, the gate swung open. Inside stretched a row of burial alcoves, their inscriptions worn smooth by centuries. Candles long extinguished had left rivers of wax on the floor. In the far corner stood something out of place, a square of newer stone set into the wall, darker than the rest. Father Brown ran his hand over it. "The restoration work from 20 years ago," he murmured. "When Lord Pembroke funded the rebuilding." Mrs. Hargreaves frowned. "But why would he place new stone here, among the graves?" He pressed his ear against it. "Because he wasn't repairing the past," he said softly. "He was hiding it." After several minutes of searching, he found a small metal ring embedded in the floor near the wall. He pulled, and a hidden panel gave way with a dull scrape. Beneath it was a wooden chest, bound in iron and sealed with wax, its surface marked with the same crest he had seen on the letter, a cross and a crown. Mrs. Hargreaves gasped. "Good Lord!" "Not quite," Father Brown whispered. He knelt and brushed off the dust. The chest was heavy, the metal cold to the touch. The wax seal cracked as he lifted the lid. Inside lay a revolver, its barrel cleaned and oiled though years had passed since its making. Beside it were medals, letters, and photographs. And wrapped carefully in cloth was something gleaming, small silver chalices, a rosary of pure crystal, and a pattern etched in French script. Mrs. Hargreaves clutched her throat. "Church silver," she breathed. "From France." "Yes," Father Brown said. "Taken during the war. Hidden here to sanctify a theft under the guise of faith." He read one of the letters, its ink faded but legible. "We swore on this day, before God, to return the treasure we found in the ruins of St. Michel. But one of us, Pembroke, believes it divine reward. I fear what he has become." Father Brown sighed. "For men stole what was sacred. One repented, one demanded justice, and one sought to bury the truth. That leaves one more unaccounted for." He lifted the medals, each engraved with initials. LP for Pembroke. GG for Gervase. Another bore RM. The fourth, blank. Mrs. Hargreaves watched uneasily. "What will you do, Father?" "Bring it to light," he said. "For truth cannot rest in the dark." Later that day, Father Brown met Inspector Craven outside the churchyard. The inspector was in no mood for sermons. "More secrets, Brown? You priests do love your mysteries." "This one isn't mine," Father Brown said, handing him the revolver. "It belonged to a soldier who called himself righteous." Craven examined it, his brows furrowing. "Same caliber as the gun that killed Pembroke. And you found it under the altar? Good heavens. There's something else," Father Brown said. "The stolen silver. They hid it here after the war. Pembroke used it to forge the church's new cross." Craven gave a low whistle. "You mean the cross on the manor's mantelpiece?" "Yes," Father Brown replied. "A holy relic born of theft. And now it's soaked in blood." Craven scribbled notes furiously. I'll need to question Mrs. Pembroke again. Father Brown placed a hand on his arm. Be gentle, Inspector. She's not innocent, but she is broken. Craven huffed. You always see souls, Father. I see suspects. Perhaps that's why we make such a peculiar pair, the priest said, smiling faintly. By dusk, a thin rain began to fall again, drumming softly on the roof of the church. Father Brown sat near the altar, the chest open beside him, the silver items glimmering like cold stars. He picked up the crystal rosary and let it slip through his fingers, each bead catching the candlelight. He thought of Gervais, of his weary eyes and trembling voice. Of the way he had spoken of sins returning. He had not been seeking revenge, he had been trying to finish a confession cut short by fear. Then, somewhere beyond the church walls, a faint sound broke his reverie, a crunch of footsteps on gravel. He looked up. The door at the back creaked open. A silhouette appeared in the threshold, a tall man in a long coat, his face hidden beneath a hat. He stepped inside slowly, his boots echoing against the stone floor. Father Brown, he said in a smooth, low voice. I believe you found what belongs to me. The priest rose quietly. Then you must be Captain Rains. The man smiled faintly. So you've done your reading. I prefer listening, Father Brown said. It tells me more about a man's soul. Rains glanced at the chest. That box was meant to stay buried. Pembroke betrayed us all when he used the silver for his vanity. Now he's paid his price. You killed him, Father Brown said softly. I set things right, Rains corrected. You of all people should appreciate divine justice. Justice, the priest murmured, does not wear vengeance for a crown. Rains's smile vanished. He broke an oath to God. And so did you, Father Brown replied, stepping closer. You swore to return what was stolen, not to destroy what remained of your brothers. The captain's eyes darkened. The war changed everything. Father Brown shook his head. War reveals everything. It never changes what's already there. For a long moment, the two men stood in silence, the lantern's flame flickering between them. Then Father Brown spoke again, gently. Confession is not the end, Captain. You wrote those words, didn't you? Rains hesitated. Yes, he said finally. Because confession without punishment is hollow. Then you've mistaken the voice of God for the echo of your own guilt. Rains's hand trembled near his coat pocket. Father Brown's eyes followed the motion, there was another revolver there. The priest took a slow step forward. If you fire that, you'll bury your soul deeper than any crypt could hold. Let the dead rest, my son. Rains's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering toward the chest. For a heartbeat, the silence was thick as fog. Then, with a sudden movement, he turned and fled into the rain, his footsteps vanishing into the distance. Father Brown exhaled, closing the chest gently. So the will turns once more, he murmured. But it will not stop until truth and mercy meet. Outside, the church bell rang once, though no one touched the rope. Chapter 5, The Widow's Confession. The following morning, Saint Agnes lay beneath a thin veil of fog that crept low over the fields. A chill clung to the air, the kind that seeped into stone and bone alike. Father Brown stood by the vestry window, staring out across the churchyard. The events of the past nights had tangled into a web of guilt and grief. Now, the threads were tightening. Mrs. Pembroke's carriage appeared through the mist just after sunrise. She stepped out slowly, dressed still in black, her veil drawn but her bearing calm, too calm for a woman recently widowed. She entered the church without a word and walked straight to the front pew, where she knelt before the altar. The silver crucifix above her caught the light, gleaming cold and bright. Father Brown approached quietly. "You've come early, my lady," he said softly. Her voice wavered beneath the veil. "You found the chest, didn't you?" He nodded. "Yes. And I found the truth it carried." Mrs. Pembroke lowered her head. "Then there's no need for pretense anymore." They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, a crow called from the church roof. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady but hollow. "It began in France," she said. "My husband and his comrades were part of a regiment assigned to guard a monastery near Rouen. The Germans had fled, leaving behind ruins, and treasures. Chalices, icons, crosses, all meant for safekeeping. The monks were gone. Only death remained." Her gloved hands tightened on the pew. "They were told to protect the relics until they could be returned to the church. But greed is a subtle poison, Father. One of them, Captain Rains, said they had earned a reward for surviving hell." Gervais agreed. "My husband," she paused, her breath trembling, "my husband believed he could hide his sin beneath devotion. He took the silver and swore to donate it later, in secret. But once home, he forged it into that cross you saw in our manor. He said it was an act of redemption." Father Brown listened quietly, eyes thoughtful. "And the others?" "They scattered after the war," she said. "One vanished in Italy. Rains joined a trading company. Gervais, he wrote often. His letters were full of scripture, but beneath it, you could feel the anger. He accused my husband of betrayal. Said their oath had been broken. That they would all be judged." Her voice faltered. "When the letters stopped, my husband grew restless. He drank. He prayed but never felt forgiven. And when he saw the cross, shining on our wall, he said it mocked him." Father Brown's tone was gentle. "He tried to make peace before he died, didn't he?" Tears slid down her cheek. "He meant to. That's why he called you to bless the house. He wanted to confess everything. But the night before, someone came to him, Gervais. They argued in the study. I was listening at the door. My husband shouted something about the silver and slammed the window shut. When I went in later, he was gone. Only blood and that letter remained." She pressed her hands together tightly. "I told the inspector it was suicide. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew." Father Brown sighed. "Your husband's death was no act of despair, it was judgment. And now Gervais has paid for his part as well." Mrs. Pembroke looked up sharply. "Gervais is dead?" The priest nodded. "Found hanging in the church belfry. The cross in his hand. But I don't believe he tied the rope himself." Her eyes widened, horror flickering across her face. Then it was Rains." "I think so," Father Brown said softly. "He came here last night. Claimed he was righting old wrongs. But vengeance rarely stops at one." Mrs. Pembroke rose slowly, her veil trembling. "Then you must stop him, Father." "I intend to," he said. "But not with force. With truth." She turned to the altar, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. Rains came to me too. A week before all this began. He said he'd found Gervais in London and forced him to talk. He wanted the rest of the silver. I told him there was nothing left. He laughed and said, 'Then I'll take what sin owes me.'" Father Brown's eyes softened. "And what did you give him?" Mrs. Pembroke hesitated, then reached into her handbag. She withdrew a small silver coin, tarnished and scratched. "Part of the old chalice," she said. He said this would buy forgiveness. The priest looked at it, his expression unreadable. Forgiveness is never purchased, he murmured. Only received. By mid-morning, Father Brown walked with her to the graveyard where Lord Pembroke was buried. The fog was lifting, revealing pale rows of headstones slick with dew. They stopped at the fresh mound of earth beneath a simple cross. Mrs. Pembroke knelt, tracing her husband's name on the wooden marker. He wanted to return the silver to the church, she whispered. But I wouldn't let him. I was afraid it would destroy what little respect he had left. I told him silence was mercy. Father Brown knelt beside her. Silence is mercy only when the truth harms the innocent. When it hides the guilty, it becomes another sin. She turned toward him, her eyes wet. Then what should I do, Father? Confess. Before God and man, he said gently. Let the truth come clean before more souls are lost. She closed her eyes, tears slipping through her lashes. If I speak, they'll call my husband a thief. They'll strip his name of every honor. They already have, Father Brown said softly. But heaven may still call him repentant. For a moment, she looked like a child, lost, trembling, afraid of the light. Then she nodded slowly. You're right. The truth must come out. As they rose, Father Brown noticed a shadow moving at the edge of the graveyard, a tall figure watching from behind the yew trees. When he turned to look fully, it was gone. He frowned. He's here, he murmured. Rains? Or what's left of the man he once was, Father Brown said. That evening, as the fog returned and the lamps flickered across the manor road, Father Brown wrote a short note and sealed it with his ring. He handed it to Mrs. Hargreaves. For Inspector Craven. Tell him to meet me at the church before midnight. Then, taking his lantern, he stepped out into the dark. Behind him, the bells of St. Agnes tolled once, soft and solemn, as though the church itself understood what was coming, the final act of a sin born in war, and now ready to be judged in peace. And in the distance, through the shrouded mist, a single glint of silver caught the moonlight, like a cross, or a weapon, or both. Chapter 6, The Third Man Appears. The fog rolled back into St. Agnes by evening, thick as wool and ghostly white. It muffled every sound, the church bell, the clop of hooves, even the faint hum of the wind. Father Brown walked along the narrow path toward the church, lantern in hand, his cassock brushing against the dew-damp grass. The light from his lantern wavered in the mist like a small trembling soul. He knew tonight would not pass quietly. Captain Rains was still out there, driven by guilt, convinced that vengeance could cleanse what only confession could cure. And somewhere in that darkness, another life was in danger. When Father Brown reached the church steps, he found Inspector Craven already waiting. The inspector's overcoat glistened with rain. I came as you asked, Craven said. But if this is another of your sermons, I'd rather not freeze while hearing it. The priest smiled faintly. No sermon, Inspector. Only an ending. An ending to what? Father Brown's eyes drifted to the graveyard behind the church. To a war that refused to die. They entered the nave. The lantern light cast long shadows over the pews and the altar. The chest of relics still sat near the front, covered with a cloth. Craven moved toward it immediately. You should have handed this over days ago, he said. It's evidence. It's more than that, Father Brown replied. It's the heart of the matter. A mirror for 3 souls. The inspector grunted. 2 of those souls are already cold. Pembroke and Gervase. Which leaves the third, said the priest softly. Before Craven could answer, a sound echoed through the church, the creak of the back door. Both men turned sharply. Through the mist seeping in from outside, a figure appeared, tall, gaunt, moving with a limp. His uniform coat hung open, revealing a glint of metal beneath. Captain Rains stepped forward, his eyes hollow but alive with a terrible calm. "Good evening, Father," he said. "Inspector." Craven's hand went instinctively to his revolver. "Stay where you are, Captain." Rains raised both hands, his voice steady. "No need for guns, Inspector. I came to confess." Father Brown's brow lifted slightly. "Confession is best spoken to God, not to men holding pistols." Rains smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you can translate for me." He moved slowly down the aisle, his limp dragging slightly, his shadow stretching across the stone floor. When he reached the front, he stopped before the altar and looked at the covered chest. "So you found it," he said softly. "The box we buried under holy stone. I wondered who would uncover it first, the law, or the Lord." Craven barked, "You'll answer for what you did to Gervais." Rains turned his head, his voice low. Gervais was weak. He couldn't live with guilt. He begged for forgiveness but refused to return the silver. He said it belonged to God now. So I sent him to meet him. The inspector took a step forward, but Father Brown held out a hand. "Wait." His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Let him finish." Rains's eyes flickered toward the priest. "You understand, don't you? Pembroke stole, Gervais lied, and I balanced the scales. By killing them? By giving them justice," Rains said, his voice hardening. "We swore an oath, Father. For men before a ruined altar. We promised that none of us would profit from sacred things. But Pembroke built his life on them. The cross in his manor, the silver in his church, it was blasphemy." Father Brown's gaze was steady. "And you thought murder would make it holy again?" Rains laughed bitterly. "Holy? No. But clean." He reached into his coat and drew out a small pistol, though he did not aim it. The inspector tensed, but Father Brown's tone remained unshaken. "You've carried that burden long enough, my son," he said. "You've mistaken vengeance for repentance. They are not the same." Rains's hand trembled. "And what would you have me do, Father? Kneel before God and hope he forgets what we did?" "No," Father Brown said softly. "I'd have you remember what he already forgave." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the drip of rain outside. Then Rains's expression shifted, anger melting into weariness. His voice lowered. "You don't know what it was like out there. The hunger, the fear. We were told the silver belonged to no one. It was just, lying there. And when I saw it, shining through the rubble, I thought maybe God was giving us something for all we'd lost." He looked down at his shaking hand. "But it wasn't a gift. It was a test." Craven spoke gruffly. "And you failed it." Rains gave a bitter smile. "No, Inspector. We all did." He walked toward the altar, his limp more pronounced. Father Brown watched quietly, saying nothing. Rains placed the pistol on the cloth, beside the chest. "I'm tired," he said simply. "Tired of ghosts, of letters, of bells ringing for men already judged." Father Brown stepped closer, his voice low and kind. "Then end it with mercy, not death. Return what was stolen. Speak the truth. Let the living be forgiven. Rains hesitated. His eyes glistened with something between sorrow and surrender. Then, slowly, he removed a small object from his pocket, a medal, its ribbon frayed. The last piece, he said. I kept it all these years. He placed it gently atop the chest. Now it's yours, Father. Do with it what I couldn't. For the first time, the priest saw the man's shoulders relax, as though a heavy weight had finally slipped free. Craven stepped forward, cuffs ready. Captain Rains, you're under arrest for. But before he could finish, a shot rang out outside the church. Glass shattered. The lantern flickered. Craven spun around, gun drawn. What in blazes? Father Brown froze. The bullet had not been fired inside, but someone had fired at the church. Rains stumbled, clutching his chest. A dark bloom spread across his coat. His lips parted in shock. So, he found me first, he whispered. Who? Father Brown asked urgently, kneeling beside him. Rains's eyes dimmed. The fourth man, we thought he died in Italy, his hand fell limp. Father Brown bowed his head. Requiem aeternam dona ei, Domini, he murmured softly. Craven cursed, rushing toward the door, but the night outside was empty, only the sound of rain and the echo of a retreating horse. When he returned, Father Brown was closing the captain's eyes. The pistol lay untouched on the altar, the chest still sealed. 3 men dead, Craven said grimly. And now a 4th killer loose. Father Brown stood slowly, the lantern casting his shadow long against the wall. No, Inspector. Not loose. Coming home. He turned toward the window, where the faint outline of the manor road vanished into mist. The sins of Saint Agnes, he said quietly, are returning to the place they began. Chapter 7, The Last Witness. Dawn broke in silence over Saint Agnes. A thin veil of mist lingered in the fields, glowing faintly beneath a sky of pale gray. The church bells did not ring that morning. They hung still and mute, like weary sentinels who had seen too much. Father Brown stood alone at the altar, the silver chest beside him, the pistol and medal laid atop it. His face was drawn, but calm, as though resignation had replaced fear. 3 men were gone, Pembroke, Gervase, Rains, and yet the chain of guilt still had one link left. The 4th man. The missing soldier. He had no name in the parish registers, no mention in the military records Father Brown had seen. Only one clue remained, the faint initials, C.W., etched into a torn corner of a photograph he'd found in the chest. Craven entered quietly, hat in hand. He looked older than he had the day before. We searched the roads, he said. No rider, no tracks. Whoever fired that shot last night vanished into the fog. Father Brown didn't look up. He didn't vanish, Inspector. He hid somewhere close. Craven frowned. You think he's still in the village? I think he never left. He picked up the photograph, its edges worn thin. C.W., he murmured. A name erased by time, yet bound to all the others by sin. Craven sighed. You always speak in riddles, Brown. If you know who it is, say so plainly. The priest turned. I don't know his name yet. But I know his voice. I heard it. The inspector stared. When? Last night, Father Brown said quietly. After the shot. Someone whispered outside the church door. I thought it was the wind until I heard the words, "Justice isn't yours, Father. It's mine." Craven's expression hardened. "And you're sure it wasn't Rains?" "Rains was dying," the priest said softly. The voice was strong, full of hate. "Someone younger. Someone who knew where to aim." Later that morning, Father Brown made his way through the village, stopping first at the blacksmith's forge, then the post office, and finally the Pembroke estate. Everywhere, people watched him with hushed curiosity. The whole village whispered now about the curse of Saint Agnes, about ghosts and vengeance, and the priest who walked through it like a man in a dream. At the manor, the servants greeted him nervously. Mrs. Pembroke was resting, they said. The doctor had ordered quiet. But as Father Brown climbed the stairs, he could hear soft murmuring from her room, a low male voice and a woman's reply, muffled by distance. He paused at the door. The voice stopped. "Come in," Mrs. Pembroke called faintly. He entered. She sat in a chair near the window, pale and fragile, her hands clasped tightly around a black handkerchief. Standing behind her was Samuel, the young servant who had once spoken to Father Brown in fear. His expression was cold now, strangely detached. "Father," Mrs. Pembroke said. "You've returned." "I have," he replied. "To see the truth finished." Samuel stepped forward. "The inspector's not with you?" "No," Father Brown said gently. "Should he be?" The young man's jaw tightened. "He should be here to hear her confess." Mrs. Pembroke's eyes widened in panic. "Samuel, please." He cut her off. "She lied to you, Father. She lied to everyone. She was the one who wrote to Gervais. She lured him here. She wanted the chest found, the silver exposed. She wanted them all destroyed." Father Brown regarded him quietly. "And you know this, how?" "I read the letters," Samuel snapped. "I found them in her desk. She said she feared her husband's shame, but it was her own she feared. She was the one who begged them to bring the silver home. She thought it would make them rich." "Enough!" Mrs. Pembroke cried, rising to her feet. "It isn't true. Isn't it?" Samuel turned to her, his voice trembling. "You used us all. You made me deliver your messages to Rains. You told me to lie when the police asked who came to the house that night." Tears streaked her cheeks. "I was trying to save what was left of my husband's name." Father Brown's eyes flicked between them. The truth was surfacing like something dragged from deep water, ugly, gasping, unwilling to die quietly. He stepped closer. "Samuel," he said softly. "You said you found her letters. Did you also find the pistol?" The young man's lips parted, just slightly. Father Brown nodded slowly. "You did, didn't you? You fired the shot that killed Rains." Samuel's face went pale. "No. You wanted to stop him," the priest continued gently. "You saw him as the monster who destroyed the family that fed you. But you didn't know the whole story. None of them did." The boy's voice broke. "He was going to kill her. I saw him outside last night with a gun, I thought." Father Brown laid a hand on his shoulder. "You thought you were saving her soul. But you only added one more sin to the pile." Samuel's hands began to shake. "I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted to scare him away." Mrs. Pembroke's sobs filled the room. "He did it for me," she whispered. "I told him everything, Father. About Rains, about the silver, about the oath. He said he'd protect me. I never knew. The priest's voice was calm, but his words cut deep. Protection built on lies cannot stand. The truth always finds its way through. Samuel fell to his knees. What will happen to me? Father Brown sighed, his expression heavy with sorrow. Justice belongs to men, but forgiveness belongs to God. Tell the inspector the truth. He will judge what the law demands. The rest you must leave to heaven. The young man looked up, tears mixing with the dust on his face. Do you believe I can be forgiven? The priest smiled faintly. If I didn't, I'd have left St. Agnes long ago. That afternoon, the inspector took Samuel into custody. There was no fight, no struggle. The boy went quietly, his head bowed, a rosary in his pocket. Mrs. Pembroke stood at the window as they led him away, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles turned white. Father Brown remained beside her. You have one duty left, he said softly. Return what was taken. Bring the silver back to the church. Let it rest where it belongs. She nodded slowly. And then? Then you pray, he said. For him. For them. And for yourself. As he left the manor, the clouds parted for the first time in days, and sunlight broke across the path. Yet even in that light, the air felt heavy, as though the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for the last of its sins to be buried. The priest paused at the gate and looked back once more. In the window above, Mrs. Pembroke stood motionless, her black veil fluttering like a flag of surrender. And in the distance, from the church tower, a single bell rang, soft, hesitant, like a question asked to heaven. Chapter 8, The Confession at Dawn. The night passed slowly, heavy with silence. The rain had ceased, yet its memory lingered in the damp scent of earth and the soft dripping from the church eaves. St. Agnes, weary from days of unrest, lay still beneath a sky streaked with faint silver. Father Brown had not gone home. He remained in the church long after Inspector Craven had taken Samuel away, long after the lamps were dimmed and the last echoes of footsteps faded. The altar before him glowed softly in the light of 2 candles. Beside it sat the silver chest, its lid now open. Inside, the stolen relics gleamed faintly, chalices, medals, and the ornate silver cross that had traveled through so many sinful hands. He lifted the cross gently, studying its surface. The blood had been cleaned away, yet somehow it still seemed stained by memory. He spoke aloud, voice quiet but steady. You have been carried by greed, judged by wrath, and wept over by guilt. May you now rest in grace. He replaced the cross upon the altar and knelt in prayer. The wind outside sighed through the cracks of the door. The faint creak of wood in the rafters sounded almost like footsteps. Then came a softer sound, the echo of the church door opening. Father Brown looked up. The figure that entered was slight, dressed in mourning black. Mrs. Pembroke moved down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps, her veil lifted, her face pale but calm. I thought I'd find you here, she said. Her voice was weary, stripped of pretense. I was expecting you, Father Brown replied. She stopped before the altar, eyes fixed on the open chest. The inspector said the silver would be sealed away as evidence. I couldn't bear it. It belongs here, not in some cold room. It does, Father Brown said softly. And so do confessions. She looked at him, her eyes hollow. You think me a murderer's accomplice. Perhaps I am. I told Samuel to keep Rains away. I made him believe it was his duty. I knew what I was doing." Father Brown said nothing for a moment. Then he asked gently, "Why come now?" Her hands trembled as she touched the edge of the altar. "Because I'm tired of living on lies. For years I pretended my husband's piety was enough to cleanse what he'd done. I prayed beside him while he wept in secret. And when he died, I told myself I could save his name by silence. But silence, it only feeds the darkness." Tears glistened in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "So here I am, Father. To give back what was never ours and to ask for what I no longer deserve." Father Brown rose slowly, his face lit by the candle glow. "No one deserves forgiveness, my dear. That's what makes it divine." For a moment she stood motionless, her gaze locked on the cross. Then she reached into her cloak and drew out a small vial, a bottle of clear liquid that caught the candlelight like crystal. He recognized it instantly. "Poison," he said quietly. She nodded. "I carried it since the night my husband died. It was his. He meant to use it, but he never did. I thought, perhaps now it should end where it began." The priest stepped forward, his tone still gentle but firm. "Taking your life will not return peace. It will only leave another grave unhealed." Her eyes softened. "You mistake me, Father. I don't seek escape. I seek atonement." He frowned slightly. "Then atone by living." She smiled faintly, a sad, faraway smile. "My living has done nothing but bring harm. Let my dying be my confession." Before he could move, she uncorked the vial and drank. The sound of glass against her teeth was small but terrible. "Mrs. Pembroke." Father Brown rushed forward, catching her as she staggered. She clutched the cross as she sank to her knees, her breath coming shallow, her lips pale. He held her close, murmuring prayers, but she only smiled weakly. Tell them I returned it," she whispered. "Tell them it's finished." "No," he said softly, "nothing is ever finished until mercy speaks." Her fingers loosened. The cross fell from her hand and clattered softly against the stone floor. Her eyes drifted toward the stained glass window, where the first light of dawn filtered through in shards of color, blue, red, gold. "Look," she breathed faintly. "It's morning." And then she was still. The sun rose fully, washing the church in pale light. The bells tolled once, slow and deep, as though announcing not judgment, but rest. Inspector Craven arrived shortly after. He found Father Brown seated near the altar, the cross cradled in his lap, his expression one of quiet sorrow. "She's gone?" Craven asked softly. "She's gone," Father Brown replied. "But her soul may finally sleep." The inspector sighed, removing his hat. "So it ends." Father Brown looked at the relics, the chest, the still air of the church. "No, Inspector. It never ends. Sin is a seed, mercy is the soil. Only when they meet does life begin again." Craven gave a dry chuckle. "You priests always find poetry in tragedy." "Because tragedy is what brings men back to God," Father Brown said. He rose and walked to the altar, placing the silver cross at its center once more. "The relics will remain here until their return to their rightful home in France. Their journey ends not in wealth or vengeance, but in forgiveness." Craven nodded slowly. "And the boy?" "Samuel will serve his time," said the priest. "But I'll see that he's not forgotten. His sin was born of loyalty, not malice." The inspector looked around the church, as though half expecting the shadows themselves to speak. "You know, Brown," he said quietly, "for all your talk of mercy, this place feels cursed." Father Brown smiled faintly. "Curses only cling to those who stop seeking light." That evening, as the village prepared for Sunday service, Father Brown stood once more before the altar. The candles burned low, the relics gleamed faintly in their rightful place. Outside, children laughed in the streets, small, distant sounds of life returning. He whispered a final prayer for the dead, Pembroke, Gervase, Rains, and the lady who had tried to protect them all. Then, with a deep breath, he extinguished the last candle. Darkness filled the church for a heartbeat, soft and calm. Through the high window, the sunrise still glowed faintly against the horizon, painting the cross in hues of gold. Father Brown crossed himself. "Peace," he murmured, "has finally come to St. Agnes." And as he turned to leave, the bells rang once more, not in mourning this time, but in forgiveness, their echo stretching gently across the waking fields.